Hey, this is author A.L.McCarroll coming at you from my desk in my room. And this time we'll be going over chapter 6 of my book 1 of the Into the Void trilogy, The Pawn. And if you haven't checked out my earlier videos, go back and go through chapters 1 through 5 before you hit up this one. Alright, now we're going to talk about a little bit of a review over what happened in chapter 5. We had a little bit more of Guinevere obsessing over the crystal and more of Robert Higgins, a little bit of an intro into the antagonist Avenger. So that's been pretty cool. And this upcoming chapter is going to be a good one, so stick with me. All right, and as far as how I've been doing, we've got a little outside kitty cat. She's a black cat, adorable, definitely a very Halloween cat. And I called her Little Bit when she was a baby, but then now that she's older, I'm calling her Bitsy, and she's a mama. And the exciting thing is, we're just now starting to see two little fluffball kittens. They were under my car, so I know I need to be extra careful, make sure I bang on my car, make sure those kittens are safe. But it's been really exciting, and I hope I get to hold a little baby kitten soon. I'm so excited for it. Well, that's about it for right now, so let's get this thing started. Chapter 6. Christopher Tarring was the head of the family of the oldest Gaian-born settlers who settled on the beautiful planet of Titania. Before they would be permitted to excavate on the world, they would need his approval. Guinevere had dealt with him before when she set up the universal transmitters for that planet. Since they were satellites that would stay in Titania's orbit, she was allowed near the atmosphere to tend to those satellites but never granted access to land on the world. Christopher Tarring was an arrogant man with many ideas that rubbed Guinevere the wrong way. He believed Gaian-born humans were the only pure humans. He was adamant about not allowing her to bring any of her qualified workers that were altered. He had told her many times over calm that the altered were not pure humans in his eyes, and he refused to work with her if she brought tainted blood to his world. He was rumored to be a leading member of a secret anti-altered group. Still, there had never been any evidence of those rumors. Guinevere knew that no matter how much she detested the man, she still needed to do things his way if she was going to be allowed onto the planet. He made her present detailed evidence of her discovery to the group of dignitaries over a GCOM video chat. The group had been genuinely interested and excited for a source of power that would give more of an option of keeping the pristine quality of the planet. Titania was a world of nearly untouched beauty, fresh water, and clean air. Many wealthy Gaian families moved past the Owen Belt to the planet Titania as the generations passed. As they had, the need for fuel skyrocketed. The world was starting to see effects of pollution. She knew they couldn't refuse her when she had such a simple cure. She had fought hard for a year. Ultimately, they had allowed her team to come to the world. Part of their issue with the excavation was that if the rare mineral were to be found, she had demanded exclusive rights to it. That had caused an uproar between all of the dignitaries. Their dreams of profiteering off of the rare mineral ended when she explained that the world grid alone would take decades to create. The elderly men would never live to see the work be accomplished, let alone reap the financial benefits. Between the times that year of vouching for the excavation, she had started back up the coffee visits with Dr. Silver. He had made her hold up her promise to get a complete set of diagnostic tests. He had performed a standard X-ray and blood panel. When she went in to have both a CAT scan and an MRI, she told him he was being excessive. Still, Dr. Silver explained that the CAT scan would produce faster picture results of tissue organs and skeletal structures, At the same time, the MRI was better at helping determine if there were abnormal tissues in her body. On the day she went in for testing, her mind felt lighter and her thoughts were clear. Guinevere thought this was her mental determination to get the second journal back. Every test they ran showed that she was in good health. When it was over, she began to feel the weight of impending work she had to do settling back onto her mind. Dr. Silver had given her back the journal he had taken. She had stored it back in the wall panel in her office. The day finally came for them to go to planet Titania. In the end, Mr. Tarring had given her 1 month to excavate, and they would be made to leave the planet once the time was up. Guinevere had nearly fought back on the decision, but stopped herself. This was generous of them, since they had no guaranteed benefit from her finding anything. However, they did tack on a hefty daily charge for each of the 25 people she was bringing along. They had called it an ambassador tax. Guinevere knew it was just a fancy name for, no matter what, we will get something out of this. Guinevere hadn't seen a space shuttle break the atmosphere in a long time, and admired the view of the world shrinking below her as she watched through a window. The darkness of space, freckled with stars, enveloped Gaia. The world became as small as a marble as the ship traveled toward its destination. "This is my second time on an interplanetary shuttle." Dr. Silver's voice came from behind her. She turned to see him standing near her window. He held out a cup that she took. "Thanks. I've always enjoyed watching the world shrink away." He drank coffee from his cup as he looked out of the window, his deep blue eyes looking thoughtful. They had some time to wait, and she was curious. "The other time, was it when you went to Gwentech's outreach program?" "It was," he replied, still looking out of the window. She smiled as she thought of a younger version of the man beside her. "I'm sure your parents must have been proud of you." He looked back at her with a weak smile. "I'd like to think they would have been. They both passed before I got contracted with the program." Silence fell. She watched the ship pass through the Owen belt. The broken pieces, suspected to be a long-destroyed planet, drifted distantly from each other. "I'm sorry." He waved his free hand dismissively. "It's okay." They both looked out of the window, letting the silence of the void fill the space between them. Guinevere stood beside Dr. Silver and watched the stars pass through the window. Planet Gaia was so small now that it couldn't be recognized from the multitude of tiny specks of light in the darkness of space. Guinevere held her empty coffee cup at her side. She felt warmth envelop the top of her hand. She looked down to see Dr. Silver's hand over hers. Her heart beat fast, and her face instantly flushed. Guinevere looked up. They locked eyes. She let her gaze linger. I can take your cup, since you're finished." Dr. Silver stumbled over his words. "Of course, thank you," she stammered, feeling flustered. He nodded and walked away, holding the coffee mugs together. "I saw all of that, Gwen." She turned and looked. Daisy was coming out of a crowd, passing through the shuttle aisle. Daisy had a genuine smile, not one of her typical mischievous smirks. "You do like him." Before she could think of something to tell Daisy, her friend continued. "I'm not going to mess with you, Gwen. It's just nice to see you show interest in someone for once. I'm excited for you." Daisy squeezed her shoulder affectionately. "I'm always here for you, if you need me." Daisy walked away into the bustling crowd. The sight of Titania from space was just as beautiful as Guinevere had remembered. Its dark waters were dappled with lush green continents. Its ice caps were prominent on its poles. All of these things Gaia used to have long ago. The old world had a problem with planet-wide pollution that caused the ice caps to melt. The destruction period had shrunk part of the old continents, changing the landscape from its original shape. Guinevere watched in awe as the shuttle touched down in the main city of Utopia. She left the shuttle first and was greeted by a well-dressed man with a cultured accent. "Dr. Guinevere Matthews, it is an honor to finally have you on our planet. First, I will take you and your team to Mr. Taurine, who will give you an introductory speech. Once you are done there, I will show your team to your base of operations. For the agreed-upon time you will be with us." The fancy man led them to a few open-top transport vehicles. They had many rows of seats, and her team of 25 loaded onto them. They took winding scenic paths that showcased the picturesque nature of the world. As they approached their destination, the man escorting them spoke into a receiver on the vehicle's dash. "We will soon be reaching Taurine Manor. You will see it just past this line of trees near the hilltop." As they passed the trees, Guinevere could see a vast home standing out among the trees that threatened to swallow it. Christopher Taurine was waiting empirically in front of his mansion home. After exiting the vehicles, the escort ushered them toward where Mr. Taurine waited. His eyes scanned the crowd as he motioned for the escort to come forward. Mr. Taurine whispered something to him and pointed out a man in the group whose brown hair nearly matched his skin and eye colors. They spoke in hushed tones, then the fancy man waved her over. She clenched her teeth as she walked forward to talk to Mr. Taurine. "It is nice to meet the great scientist Guinevere Matthews." She smiled back at him in a false show of happiness. "I feel honored to finally see you in person, Mr. Taurine." As she spoke, she could see his features darken. "My dear, we already know each other so well with all of our previous communications. That is why I want to ask you why you brought one of them." He pointed to a man in the crowd named Maxim, and she saw a look of confusion on Maxim's face. "You do this knowing how I feel about their kind. That's not the best first impression, my dear." It took everything within her not to show the burning hatred she felt for Mr. Taurine at that moment. "I believe you are mistaken, sir. That is my colleague Maxim, and his ancestry is purely Gaian. I can show you his medical chart to prove he has not received any cosmetic or enhancement variety alterations." She flipped through her comm, getting his particular document. She showed the evidence to Mr. Taurine, which seemed to calm him down. "You should really get him to change that hair color. It matches his skin and makes him look as if he's altered it to look that way. It's a very undesirable effect. I'm going to begin my speech now, Dr. Matthews. You should rejoin the crowd." She did as told, still seething as she took her place in the group. "Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I am Christopher Taurine, ancestor of Daniel Taurine, one of the original founders of Gaia." Guinevere remembered the name Daniel Taurine from the museum. There had been a framed quote of his that she had moved from the wall she had tried to cut into. She wondered how mad Mr. Taurine would be if he knew relics of his ancestors were being guarded by an altered. His showman voice and grand gestures broke her thoughts. "I'm sure you can see why we take such precautions to keep this world so beautiful and pure, and I bet every one of you feels honored to be here today. This exemplifies the finest quality of life our early old world ancestors could enjoy. Maybe one day you, too, can live the Titanian dream." She quickly grew bored of his speech, and her eyes wandered to the large home behind him. She caught a quick glimpse of a girl in a window. She was tall and slender like her father, but unlike him, she had long, straight, black hair. The girl was looking out into the crowd in front of her home. Guinevere impulsively raised her hand and waved to the girl, who quickly closed the curtain around herself. Christopher Taurine looked behind himself just in time to see the curtain close. He turned back, obviously frustrated that she hadn't been exclusively paying attention to his speech. Guinevere caught the flash of rage that showed on his face. He hid it just as quickly as it had come. Mr. Tarring turned a sickeningly sweet smile towards her. "I am so sorry for the distraction. That would be my daughter, Alexandria. Teenage girls can be so rebellious. Their problem is that they haven't quite learned their place yet. I'll make sure she won't disturb us again." Guinevere glanced from him to the window and back. "She didn't bother me, Mr. Tarring. I hope you wouldn't be so harsh to your child when she's just showing basic curiosity." Guinevere tested the accusation, knowing it could be a risk, but hoping it would cool his anger towards his daughter. It worked, but now his anger was directed at her. Guinevere didn't mind, because she knew she had started this by waving at the girl. Mr. Tarring snapped, and frustration was palpable in his tone. "I am no tyrant, Dr. Matthews. I'd be cautious throwing around accusations while you were at my mercy for your work. I could cut some of your allotted time if you get smart with me." She hated having to deal with this arrogant, affluent man. Still, she knew if he held the excavation over her head, she would have to play by his rules, even if her response made her look weak to her colleagues. "I'm sorry, Mr. Tarring. I was out of line. I do hope you can forgive me, just this once." Guinevere swallowed back the wave of pure loathing she felt at the man as the words left her mouth. He perked up and looked pleased. "Apology accepted, my dear. I'm sure you and your team are ready to get to work. Jensen will show you the facility we have provided for you. It is exactly to your specifications. Go forth and find the rare minerals so together we can help this world flourish." The escort Jensen loaded them back onto the transport vehicles and drove them down the beach line. Guinevere had asked for a base of operations to be built close to where she suspected to find the crystal she read about in the journals. The base was a small lab with sleeping rooms, meeting rooms, and offices. Once they arrived, she told her team they could take a few hours to eat and set up their rooms. When the time passed, they were to meet her along the beach line to receive instructions on where they would excavate. Guinevere spent some of that time looking over a map of a beach line in one of the small office rooms. The building was a temporary pop-up dwelling made of thick, hard, recycled material. Mr. Tarring had insisted they have a temporary structure, not to leave a dwelling without a use behind after the job was done. She had agreed, knowing that agreeing to his terms would only help her cause. She called her parents and let them know she had made it safely to Titania. After a while of speaking, and to her total shock, the door of her office opened. She had forgotten to lock it. Dr. Silver popped his head inside. "Hey, Gwen, I brought you a sandwich." She stared in shock at him over the top of her comm. "Is that him?" Her mom eagerly spoke from the screen. Guinevere's cheeks burned as she quickly spoke over her parents. "Dr. Silver, please give me a moment to finish my call." His blue eyes looked surprised as he promptly replied, "Sure thing, Gwen." She watched him leave the office, closing the speckled recycled material door behind himself. She looked back down at her parents on her comm. "Yes, that's him." Guinevere finished her call by telling her parents she loved them before going to the door and peeking outside. Dr. Silver was leaning casually on the wall holding 2 wrapped sandwiches. He looked up and smiled as he saw her. She motioned for him to come inside, and as he did, she spoke. "Thanks, I probably should eat." He passed her a sandwich wrapped in paper. "I knew you'd forget, Gwen." He had a sandwich that he begun to unwrap as he sat across from her desk. She watched him as he took a bite. "Still calling me Gwen, I see." Dr. Silver chewed and swallowed before giving her his response. "Well, you haven't stopped me." She smiled. "No, I haven't." Guinevere replied before biting into her own sandwich. It looked plain, but it was delicious. She must have been hungry, she thought. Since we're on a first-name basis, Gwen, you should start calling me Marcus. She coughed, nearly choking on her sandwich. Or Dr. Silver, he smirked, if that's easier. She finished her coughing and felt her cheeks flush. I'd appreciate you keeping things professional while you speak to me in front of our colleagues, but you may call me Gwen while we are alone, if you must. Sounds good. I'll see you around, Gwen. He stood up, the paper wrapper of his sandwich wadded up in his hand. He walked to the door, and just before he left, she stopped him. Hey! He turned back, looking at her curiously. Thanks again for the sandwich, Marcus. He grinned ear to ear. Any time, he replied with a smile that made his eyes crinkle. He left the small office, and she continued her work. The group of 25 had gathered outside the base along the light-colored beach line. The air smelled strong of ocean salt. The dark blue waters rolled in and out. The calming sound it made added something unique to the beautiful scenery. Guinevere pulled each person aside to give them a GCOM document with a map of their assigned positions and details of what they were searching for. She watched them spread along the beach line. They began using tools to sift through the sand and special light to detect anything different. As she looked down the beautiful white sand, the magnitude of the endeavor finally hit her. This would be like finding a crystal in the sands of an hourglass, and they only had so much time to try. Hey, this is A.L.McCarroll. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. Remember to give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, also turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter. Don't forget to follow me on my social media platforms for updates. You can find the links in the description box. Thank you again for watching. Stay tuned and take care.